Hello and welcome to the Sparks and Honey Culture Briefing on navigating economic uncertainty. In this session, we're going to be looking at how uncertainty has become somewhat of a constant in today's economy over the last few years, yet the nature of it is constantly shifting and evolving. In this session, we're going to look at the new economic drivers that are currently at play in 2024 and how different consumer cohorts are navigating those behaviors with their own set of attitudes and values. My name is Carrera Koenig, and I will be your host today. Joining me as co-host is Rob Henze, partner and head of policy and philanthropy practice at Sparks and Honey. And then I want to introduce a really exciting panel of guests. From the Sparks and Honey side, Mark Newhouse is here, Sparks and Honey president and COO. And then some special guests are joining us today. Luke Roberts is the senior strategic planning director at Alma. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about your background and some of the research you've been doing on uncertainty?
Yeah, thanks for having us today. I've been at Alma for about 8 years and in Hispanic advertising for about 15. And this is a research study that we undertook last fall to get a closer look at not just how people are changing their spending and their approach to life, but also how that's affecting their attitudes and their outlook on what's to come, as well as their interactions with the people around them.
Amazing. And we're going to be referencing some of this research during the briefing, so it's amazing to have you here to speak to it. And then Rebecca Vargas is joining us as well. Rebecca is a global marketing executive and former head of marketing for consumer segments at Wells Fargo. Welcome, Rebecca. Will you tell us a little bit more about your background as well?
Thank you for the invitation. Happy to be here. Yes, I've worked for more than 20 years in banking at BBVA, Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, and more recently Wells Fargo, like you mentioned. Most of my career in marketing, specifically working on diverse segments. So looking forward to including that cultural perspective on the conversation.
Right, that'll be an important nuance as we talk about how attitudes are shifting. Now I want to introduce a very special panelist too. I want to introduce Quinn, our AI strategist. You can see on the screen behind me that Quinn is tracking today's conversation, pulling in all the insights that are happening live, while simultaneously understanding the cultural conversation online. So looking at different articles and patents, tweets, to try and understand where this conversation currently is in culture. So we might also hear a little bit from Quinn. They might chime in on some of the questions today. So we'll look forward to that as well. So let's kick off today's session with a guiding question. The guiding question for today is how are consumers dealing with economic uncertainty in 2024, and how do brands strategize to stay relevant and competitive as prices stay stubbornly high? So when we have a big question like this, we like to take it to our Q Omni Cultural Intelligence System that lets us look at different audience insights. Again, we're using AI to understand the cultural landscape to create what we call a cultural zeitgeist map. So when we type into our system a query on not only economic uncertainty, but also how consumer behaviors are changing along with that uncertainty, we get this map. So unsurprisingly, unperfect is a element of culture that comes up a lot when we talk about consumer saving and spending. People are taking a view of their finances right now as, you know what, I didn't really want to spend that much this week on groceries, but I can't have the perfect spending habits. There's going to be, some kind of leeway that I give myself. Rob, what are you seeing out of this map?
The EOC that I was really drawn to, actually, more than any, is ancient wisdom, and I'll explain why. When I think about ancient wisdom as applied to sort of navigating economic uncertainty, I think about sort of like a return to things, right? And when I think about ancient wisdom in that context, I think about people taking perhaps a keener lens into sort of what I want versus what I need, right? Ancient wisdom more around the things that I need in life, which despite economic uncertainty and the pressures there, can be a healthy thing from a consumption standpoint.
I'm also looking at near nostalgia and how as consumer spending budgets tighten, that nostalgia, that emotional appeal to consumers will certainly allow them to capture their attention. So let's head into the signals we have for today. Rob, do you want to take us through this first one?
Yeah, we're going to start by kind of applying a broad lens to sort of look at that sort of broader state of uncertainty in the economy. And this first signal, published just a few weeks ago by the World Economic Forum on the heels of its annual Davos meeting in January. This is their Chief Economist Outlook, a report they release annually. And this year's Chief Economist Outlook reveals that more than half, or 56%, of chief economists expect the global economy to weaken in 2024 as as it continues to grapple with tight financial conditions, geopolitical rifts, and rapid advances in generative AI. In addition, 77% believe that the labor markets will loosen over the coming year, and 70% feel the same way around financial conditions. Taken together, this highlights the urgent need for global cooperation to build momentum for sustainable and inclusive economic growth. The second signal is we sort of double click into some of the more specific community impacts of this broader uncertainty. This piece recently released by the NAACP highlights the impact of rising inflation rates on Black Americans who are disproportionately affected by increased costs of living and financial instability. The organization intends to engage with the Federal Reserve and financial institutions more broadly to address equity issues and advocate for policies that lessen inflationary pressures on low to medium income households at large. So a question for the panel, how should organizations across the public and private sectors and policymakers be thinking about both large-scale economic uncertainty, but also the impacts of economic uncertainty on specific communities? Maybe, Mark, I'll kick it over to you first to think about that sort of broader large scale, and then we can kick it over to the rest of the panel to think about some of those specific community impacts.
Sure. I mean, I think as the first signal points out, Rob, the experts are weighing in and saying uncertainty is likely to be with us for some period of time, as Carrera sort of mentioned in the opening. So I think that's sort of first and foremost. Organizations have to think about that as they think about their strategies, their audiences, their ways of engaging people. And when it comes to brands and engaging audiences, I think, as you pointed out, income and household income, disposable income will become an increasingly important factor for brands to be thinking about in terms of, who my customer is, how I engage them successfully, and what the experience of inflation is and economic uncertainty is for them, because it's going to be quite different depending on where someone is on the income scale. I would also say, with respect to inflation, we see that number shift from one period to another depending on what the drivers of inflation are. It may be in one category more so than another. So understanding where inflation is coming from and how exposed my customer base or consumer base may be to categories that are experiencing greater inflation will also be important.
Rebecca, what are your thoughts on a cohort-specific approach to understanding inflation?
I think Latinos, if I think about specific cohorts, I think Latinos versus African Americans or other segments think about inflation slightly different, as well as age. I think it varies depending on the age, right? If you think about the white segment of the population, in general, it affects them, the changes of inflation, the impact of the inflation and increasing in prices affects them differently than Latinos and Black African American. The reality is that a Latin, brown, and Black population gets affected at a higher rate due to the increase in prices. So because of that, I think they react differently. Right. Latinos and Black African American may be forced to stay more at home, may be forced to delay some of the important investments, may be forced to even, and Alma's report talks a little bit about that, may be forced to delay going to college or going to school, right? So that's definitely, it impacts them differently. Now, in terms of specifically of Latinos, I would say, regardless of that situation, Latinos in general tend to be very optimistic, very entrepreneurial, and they are used to challenges. Right. It's in essence an immigrant community who faces a lot of challenges besides the economy. So they don't shy away from dealing with those issues. During COVID, the Latino community showed that it was during that period of time where they created more small businesses and they helped drive the economy out of the COVID situation. So I think that even though it impacts them more, there is a level of optimism among specifically Latinos.
I love that you speak to the nuance, you speak to this optimism. Our next signal talks about brand loyalty, and certainly optimism would be a really great takeaway for a brand trying to speak to specific cohorts.
This WWD report examines how American consumers are facing economic uncertainty, leading to reduced spending and decreased brand loyalty, which is very interesting. The shifting consumer behavior presents both challenges and opportunities for businesses, with a need to focus on value, build relationships with customers, and adapt to a rapidly changing market. The ALMA research that we referred to earlier in the briefing notes that most believe the U.S. economy is worse off today than before the pandemic. 93% of those polled feel some kind of impact from inflation and economic uncertainty, which impacts spending across categories. And as a result, the majority of people in the study claim to be working more in an effort to keep up with rising costs. The situation is driving increase in stress, anxiety, and depression, attributed to the rising cost of living and uncertainty around the economy. However, there does seem to be a light at the end of this tunnel, as the National Association for Business Economics predicts inflation will drop to 2.4% this year. However, CEOs and CFOs of major retailers such as Walmart, Home Depot, and Lowe's report that consumers continue to spend cautiously on non-essential and expensive items and expect this trend to persist until interest rates fall. So through that last piece there, we sort of see two forces of interest rates and inflation that, if unlocked, could potentially end some of this uncertainty or at least start to dull its impact. So a question for the panel, what strategies should brands and marketers be considering to repair brand loyalty? What surprising consumer behaviors are we seeing and are emerging?
Luke,
Luke,
kick us off.
Sure. In the space, in the face of higher prices, it feels like there is a creativity, a way to fill the gap where we might have paid professionals to help with tasks around the home, repairs, ongoing maintenance, things like that. And we're looking to friends, family, community to help us do that at a lower cost or even for free. And this is leading to a strengthening of relationships. I think in the pandemic, we all were reminded of how important those relationships are, how valuable they are. And they're turning out to be the most important resource for everyone right now. For brands to repair brand loyalty or to maintain that brand loyalty, I think it's important to revisit whether we're being overly aspirational and are we able to inspire and even give people the roadmap to do those things themselves. So maybe a food brand helping people feel more confident in the kitchen, maybe go beyond preparing food and actually entertaining. An automotive brand helping people do things more themselves and be more confident in that way could lead a brand out of this tough economic time period and be remembered as the one that help people make the most of it.
Right. I like that you speak to the kind of specific behaviors and attitudes that are evolving. Our next sector that we're going to go through on the briefing here takes a deep dive into each of those different behaviors. So we'll start here with the resurgence of hustle culture as people look for a second income. And so according to ALMA research, 30% of those surveyed are considering picking up another job or source of income. You know, there was a time that hustle culture became it was the thing to do, and then it was, you're working yourself too hard. Burnout became a big concern, but now we're back, and we have people on TikTok instructing how to make $100 a day through answering different surveys. Of course, this is a Gen Z segment, so doing different online odd jobs to make $100 a day, as this creator in this piece did. She ended up making about $11,000 in 100 days. And so that's become kind of like a beacon of hope for some hustling Gen Zers. We wanted to surface this other signal on hustle culture. Research by Payments says that 58% of U.S. consumers sold their clothing to earn extra money. So the clothing is now becoming an asset in the home. So the question for the panel here is, what do these signals around the resurgence of side hustles tell us about consumer mindset? And what strategies can brands and organizations employ to connect with these consumers? Mark, do you have a thought here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that first signal on hustle culture sort of gets to the heart of the entire conversation, which is that when human beings are confronted with uncertainty, really of any sort, there's one thing above all others that they're looking for, and that's a sense of control.
Wow.
That's sort of the antidote to uncertainty. So, folks who are going out and earning a little extra money, that's one form of control. And I think we see that in other consumer behaviors, in social media in particular, loud budgeting, no spend January. I think these are all techniques for people to exercise a bit more control in an otherwise uncertain environment. So I think brands who can tap into that and sort of impart that to their customers are the ones that are going to win. I think the second signal speaks to another key element here, which is on the question of the value proposition, right? So, I think brands who may not be the low or lowest price provider in a particular market need to switch that conversation. There might be another economic message around the total cost of ownership, and there may be other benefits that brands can tap into. So if I knew up front that there was a resale value on a piece of clothing that I was about to buy, that would change my economic calculus rather than just looking at the price tag on a standalone basis.
Mark, I love that you're using the Sparks and Honey methodology of here's the big problem of uncertainty, but what is the real core of that cultural-based emotion? And it's control. And so how can brands speak to that? I think we have, Quinn would like to share an insight. Quinn, what are your thoughts?
It's intriguing to see the resurgence of hustle culture as a response to economic uncertainty. Brands could potentially tap into this mindset by offering tools, resources, and support for individuals looking to diversify their income streams or develop new skills. By aligning themselves with consumers' aspirations and helping them achieve their goals, companies can forge stronger connections and demonstrate their commitment to customer success in these challenging times.
I love that Quinn brings up goals. So what are the goals that your consumer has? Is it to have a little more spending money, save some money? Is it to create moments of joy in their day? How do you align with that and help them achieve that? Saif, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up from Mark, who presented an economic angle, right? And Quinn, who presented an angle of responding to consumers and saying, this is, in many ways, a really good signal, right? Like, because it's reuse, or it's recycling. So I think it checks the economic box. It also checks the environment box, right? I forget the name of the platform, but I was actually quite pleased when I saw this secondhand shopping site where like you could get exact SKUs and the exact size and of actually like really good brand names. So it's also great for an entire segment of people who would not have been able to afford some of this stuff or couldn't get it because there was never a global marketplace before.
Right. I want to move on to another behavior here. Cooking at home more. So according to Alma research, 52% are eating out less, but cooking at home more to keep the family together in the kitchen and to gather the family around the dining table. This signal here that we surfaced through our Q Omni system finds that 58% of people across 142 countries said that cooking brought them joy. It allowed them to to create connection, to foster a sense of belonging. So a question here, and Rebecca, maybe I'll ask you, economic uncertainty has people cooking at home more. What implications is this having on different relationships, from the family to platonic relationships to friendships to romance, and what might that mean for brands looking to connect?
So let me step back for a little bit to I think our initial question.
Sure.
I think economic uncertainty, which it's what we are discussing, is certainly what it's in the minds of 93% of the population. 93% of consumers have expressed being concerned about the economy. A research from Michigan University recently showed that consumers believe that right now we are at a 30-year low in terms of confidence, right? So economic uncertainty is definitely very important, but I think that what it's in people's minds, it goes beyond economic uncertainty and the rise of prices. We are seeing a war. We are seeing mass shootings. We are seeing historical rulings from the Supreme Court. I think all of those things also have an impact on people's minds and people's feelings. There is also the coming out from COVID, which in a way we are still coming out. People who left their work during the big resignation are now going back to work, right? There is a concern among people about having jobs. So I think all of that, besides just the economy itself, it's part of the whole thing, right?
Right.
And I think in that regard, corporations, as well as going back to the initial question we had of governments, NGOs, et cetera, I think we need to think about all of these in a holistic fashion and address what people have in mind, which is it's more than just the rising prices.
Right.
The rising in prices affects the daily activities, but there is also the mental health that it's affected with all the other things that I mentioned before. So I think those are things that corporations need to keep in mind, need to make sure that in their communications to consumers, they are empathic about it. They realize that people are going through that, and they should be able to showcase that. And I think it's also important that at the end of the day, I think for corporations, I think it comes back to the value proposition, and you touched on the value proposition. Whatever corporations are selling to consumers needs to respond to their needs, right? Needs to solve a solution. So I think I just wanted to go back for a little bit of that. In terms of the food and this particular topic, I think in the particular case of Latinos, this actually opens opportunities, I think, for consumers, right? Look, Latinos by nature, we like to sit at the table, right? And my kids who are half Mexican, half American, they would say when we go to Mexico, we waste a lot of time around the table. I would say we enjoy the time around the table, but the reality is that our dinner, lunches, dinners, whatever, our time at the table it's a time to not only eat, but a time to interact and talk. So I think this actually represents an opportunity for consumers to leverage that insight, like I said before, communicate in a cultural, unique, authentic way.
Right. Yeah, I'm hearing empathy, leading with empathy as a key strategy, and that your point about mental health is quite interesting as well, where this might be an option to rest the mind in times where there's economic uncertainty, but as you mentioned, global uncertainty. Luke, what are your thoughts here on strategies given this signal?
Well, to your point, I really think not being able to go out and celebrate that big occasion at a restaurant, not being able to go to that concert or just spend a weekend night out reminds you that we're in tough times, but it is an opportunity to be closer together in the home. And I think a lot of brands that facilitate that, food and beverage brands, can give you ways to still feel like you're having a celebratory moment, that you're making the most of your time together, even though it may be in someone's home. And again, kind of leading people through this time in a way that may feel like there's a silver lining. I'm building my repertoire of what to prepare. I'm getting closer to my family and my friends. And we're able to still celebrate, still make the most of life. So again, I think brands always have an opportunity when there is a question of price to add intrinsic value, to give people more than just the product or service, but more inspiration and ways to use it.
Right. Mark, any thoughts on
But
what if...
I just keep thinking of sort of this idea of the silver lining that brands need to sort of find, kind of going back to what Saif said a moment ago around, the secondhand clothing market. There's a circularity, environmental stewardship silver lining to being able to do that. You may have to do that, but you're making a positive contribution. Here, there's the connection and perhaps really kind of focusing on what's most important, which is the relationship with other people rather than sort of everything that surrounds that, where we may have been spending more money. So how can brands kind of really amplify that part of the proposition and own it in this particular moment?
Yeah, brands need their own silver lining playbook, and maybe they can get Bradley on Cooper on board there. Rob, do you want to take us through this next signal?
Yeah, we're going to move to a new behavior, this time talking a bit more about travel and also DIY at home. As the Alma research notes, 20% of people are canceling holiday travel, while more are choosing to take road trips or fly during off-peak times for a vacation or to see their family or friends. In that context, a recent Lending Tree survey found that 71% of Americans with summer travel plans have changed them due to rising costs and inflation. To offset costs, 78% are opting for closer destinations, while others are choosing more affordable accommodations, nearly half, limiting spending on restaurants, nearly 40%, and hunting for vacation deals, again, nearly 40%. This second signal, which we'll group together with this first one, from traveling to talking more about home and home renovations, This next signal from NBC News notes that households are increasingly opting for cheaper DIY fixes rather than major home renovation projects due to inflation and a stagnant housing market, leading to sales declines for U.S. home improvement retailers like Lowe's and Home Depot. Market data, in addition, indicates that customers are deferring but not completely abandoning their larger renovation plans, with a potential return to pricier projects later in 2024, again, as the economy improves. I think you could draw a very clear line back to our prior note around interest rates. So the question for the group is, what do these two consumer trends around travel, DIY at home, signal about consumer buying behaviors? What might this mean for brands, for marketers, and for others that can create impact in these issues?
Luke, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Kind of going back to the top when we were talking about, lower income communities being hit the hardest, and we know that it's cost cutting and changing of behavior across the board, but for households that earn less than $60,000, $50,000 a year, a lot of them are having to forego owning a car, having to move in with other people, and you have 10, 12 people in a household. And so when we look at the data specifically around travel, what was really interesting is that Latino households are the least likely to be canceling travel to see family. And I would assume they're also dialing back any improvements in their home that aren't absolutely necessary. So again, it really puts a sharper focus on what matters.
Right.
Being with people that you want to spend time with, that you want to reconnect with, kind of pulls you forward. So having that trip, I guess maybe in distant focus that you're going to take, gives more meaning to all the sacrifices you're making, spending less on the day-to-day, knowing that ultimately you're going to get to the thing that you are going to spend your money on and get the most value from.
Rebecca, what's the strategy here?
I would like to mention two thoughts about this.
Yeah.
One is, and this is based on research that I read from McKinsey and Company, a recent one. They talked about the increase in omni-channel. So consumers are looking online, doing research, looking at multiple sites before they buy something, right? But they are also going to the stores, the brick and mortar, right? They may buy online, but then they go and pick up, which maybe it's interesting, right? But that's what it's increasing. Consumers are using more omni-channel. So I think in terms of brands, that's one thing that I think we need to keep in mind, right? The communications, the branding, the marketing, et cetera, needs to be omni-channel. The second thought is the pricing, right? There are corporations who are changing their brand, the value propositions. They are switching for options that are lower price and seem to offer more to consumers. Panera recently changed, for example, half of their menu or a lot of their menu. Target, I think it's also trying to go for cheaper items. So I think those are two items that corporations need to keep in mind as consumers change the way they are buying.
I'm going to throw it over to Quinn, our AI strategist, for some insight. Quinn, what are you thinking?
The rise of DIY fixes and closer travel destinations highlights a shift in consumer priorities, focusing on practicality and resourcefulness during these uncertain times. Brands can cater to these evolving preferences by offering affordable, versatile, and sustainable solutions that empower customers to make the most of their resources. Moreover, providing educational content and resources to support these DIY endeavors and local travel experiences can help brands demonstrate their commitment to customer success and adaptability in the face of economic challenges.
Right. Quinn mentions putting off, delaying travel and home improvement projects. Let's talk about delaying milestones. So we've got two signals here. This one, a third of Americans don't plan on having kids, largely due to cost. That's 31% of Americans under the age of 40 who are not parents saying they don't plan to have kids due to the overall cost, and usually that is due to increases in childcare costs. Rebecca, you mentioned some people delaying going to college, all these different milestones that you have to put off because there is a financial price tag attached to that wedding, attached to that new home that people just can't meet. This is kind of a problem-solution signal block. This one's kind of interesting. It says, despite woes, young consumers still want to live in the moment. So for the Gen Z generation, they know that that house isn't coming. They're not saving for that house. They're buying what we call little treat culture. They're spending that $15 on the coffee and the snack because it's about living in the moment. Maybe it's a little bit about having control over your day and your emotional state. So question here, of course, is what are the traditional with these traditional milestones being delayed, what new milestones are emerging? Is there an opportunity here for brands to kind of play into the new markers of certain life points and markers of success? Mark, do you have a question? Do you have a thought here?
On new milestones, the thought that comes to mind is that brands are not going to be able to just assume that milestones happen at the same time as they have before. So really thinking about what the impact of the economy is on when people will be doing things. But I'm also thinking of the idea of small scaling a bit. Right. That was on our zeitgeist map at the beginning. And will an environment of uncertainty lead to a small scaling of certain events and milestones, like a wedding, for example? Right. That might have been celebrated in one way before, but in this environment, people opt for a different kind of gathering, or at least an experience around that particular life event.
Right. It's almost like maybe a housewarming is a new milestone. You might not own the house, but you've moved and you're renting it. Yep. And you're inviting friends over. Luke, what are your thoughts here on milestones?
Thinking about the new behaviors, right? Maybe you have a significant following in social media and you get to a point where you have 10,000 or 20,000 followers and you can celebrate that milestone by maybe upgrading your equipment so you stream and sound better. We could also kind of look at cost savings and celebrate that I've been able to meet my budget for 6 months and now I'm going to splurge. And it's a little less reactionary and a little bit more of a celebration of sorts, right? And to your point about a housewarming, or maybe you said it, maybe we can just celebrate being able to afford your own place and not need a roommate anymore. But meeting consumers where they are and maybe helping them celebrate important yet less traditional milestones.
Totally, and we've been tracking at Sparks and Honey the rise of pet care, and it's almost tangential to the decrease in affordability of child care, where you're celebrating in kind of blowout events for your dog's birthday. You're inviting friends over. It's a kind of a new milestone is to get a dog to celebrate your pet. Rebecca, do you have any thoughts here on milestones?
I think one very important milestone for the Latino community in particular is graduations from college, right? I mean, the Latino segment is graduating from college at the highest rate in the U.S. history. The U.S. Latino population represents more than 50% of the growth of the total U.S. population. Every year, the total U.S. population increases by around 3 million people. More than 1.5 of those million are Latinos. So, and it's a younger population, is graduating from college. So I think that's a very important milestone that is being celebrated by the community. In the case of the Black African American community, this whole idea of transferring wealth, educating, et cetera, it's also very critical. And those are things that I think should be celebrated.
Right, and that nuance to these behaviors is so crucial, and we're actually going to get into that in our next signal here.
I was just going to add one thing to this signal. I think that there's also a policy role in this, right? I mean, if you think about the string of student debt forgiveness measures that have been taken, there's certainly measures that government and policymakers can make to sort of loosen the gaskets a little bit, right, and help facilitate some of these milestones that might be held up by pulling the levers that policymakers can in things like student debt and other forms of debt that can be, either delayed or fully forgiven. This next signal, we're going to put even more of a multicultural lens and add a bit of nuance to what's happening within behaviors connected to uncertainty. This recent study revealed that despite the economy growing and paychecks increasing, again, it's not all doom and gloom out there. There are a lot of very positive things happening from a market standpoint. Most people are perceiving the national economy as doing worse than before the pandemic. There's probably truth there. There's a little bit of sort of perception over reality. Maybe information that they're taking in within their information bubbles. That's for a different briefing. This, quote, silent depression is causing 93% of Americans to make changes to their spending and their financial planning, with brands advised to blend rational messages with emotional messages to resonate with consumers who are craving authentic connections and spending more time with loved ones. I'd love to hear from the group in terms of how CMOs and CEOs can navigate the multicultural landscape to accurately speak to consumer needs during this moment of economic uncertainty. Luke, maybe I'll start with you. I know that this has a lot of connectivity to the research that we've been referring to through today, so we'd love to hear your thoughts first and foremost.
Sure. We asked, a battery of questions about specific changes. How are you dealing with higher costs and uncertainty? But then we asked people, what would you like to see brands do? And the obvious things like lower prices, pay your employees better, but show us how you're helping these communities that are in need. Show us what the direct help is that you're giving to people who need it the most. And I think for CMOs to think about how that becomes part of the proposition for the brand, that if you buy us, you're actually contributing directly to the people who need it the most.
Right. Rebecca, thoughts here?
I would say that's a very good point. Particularly Black African Americans and Latinos, as well as Asians, they tell us, right? I mean, if you're helping my community, I'm going to be more inclined to buy from your brand, right? So your point, Luke, is very important. I would also say I'm a big proponent of this, and I always talk about this, being able to connect with consumers at a personal level and doing communications that are culturally relevant and authentic, right? Sometimes brands these days are attempting to just translate in the case of the Latino community. I think that being able to not only reach consumers, but to connect consumers in a culturally relevant way is very important. And then lastly, the value proposition that we've been talking about. At the end of the day, it's about the value that corporations can offer to consumers, right? It's about understanding what are the nuances among diverse consumers, what are the nuances, the unique needs that they have, and being able to respond to those particular needs.
Yeah. Mark, at Sparks and Honey, we kind of specialize in cultural relevancy. We certainly guide a lot of our partners, our clients through how to stay culturally relevant, how to speak with cultural relevancy to their consumer base. What are your thoughts on a strategy that really captures those values?
I think it starts by listening and not assuming. I mean, sort of as I listen to this conversation, it's really about the nuance from one group to another. And I think the big themes of today around what's the nature of the anxiety or concern that an audience might have? What would be the drivers of value? I mean, other than more value from money, which we might consider a given, but beyond that, how could we kind of frame the value? Which would probably speak to what's the silver lining I could then really lean into for that particular audience is really what this is about.
Yeah. As we come to the end of today's briefing, wanted to just quickly flash this signal: dollar stores get devalued as low-income consumers struggle. It's not really just a matter of economic uncertainty, meaning that you have to have the lowest price. There's other strategies that we've captured in today's briefing that are a way in for brands that don't just want to, race to the bottom of how cheap can we give consumers this item. So I would love for a round of takeaways where we talk about the strategy that you find is most impactful for reaching consumers in this age of economic uncertainty. And Mark, I'll start with you.
Yeah, well, and I think this signal sort of speaks to it, right? You would think intuitively, and you would imagine that those brands that are well positioned to compete on price are going to do that certainly in an inflationary environment. But that alone, depending on who you're serving, may not necessarily be a winning strategy. So I think it's really looking at all of the assets on the table that you've got as a brand that you can sort of reframe value, whether it's an economic form of value in something that is not so dependent on price, or it's other things that we've talked about, connection to other people, life experiences, et cetera, that you can bring to that audience.
Rob, what's your takeaway from today's discussion?
I think that we need to continue to pursue solutions that help decrease the vulnerability of low and middle income families. I mean, I think that's sort of like the crux of this. And when you see economic uncertainty and other sort of challenges, those vulnerabilities make themselves very clear. Right. So I think that's just long-term goal that we need to stay squarely focused on, whether that's from a pricing standpoint, from the private sector, whether that's from a policy standpoint, from Washington and state and local governments.
Rebecca, what's your takeaway as far as strategies in this particular market?
Yeah, I agree with what you both said, and I would add guidance and advice, I think, are important words, right? The value proposition, I think, needs to include that guidance, advice, the personal connection, the omni-channel approach. Digital marketing, I think, is very important because we are all consuming that way. So guidance and advice.
Luke, same question. Final takeaway from today's discussion.
I keep reading that people are shopping more frequently and spending less. That total ticket is smaller, and there might be a psychological impact there. But I'm not surprised that people are shopping dollar less, because you still want to feel like you're bringing some quality home. And so for all brands, we need to realize that that decision is being made more frequently. And so we have more opportunities to kind of break through as impacting not just what people buy, but how they live.
Right. Well, that's going to take us through today's briefing. Luke, Rebecca, it was amazing to have you on to share your perspective. Thank you to everybody who joined in person, everyone who joins online. I'll look ahead at this week's content. On Thursday, we're going to be talking about the future of climate adaptive infrastructure. You really won't want to miss that session, but until then, you can consider yourselves briefed. All right.